So we're going to start assembling this shader set here. And we're going to run into a little problem, and the solution to that problem is going to be linear workflow. So we're going to talk a bit about that. So inside of the starter kit here, under starter kit, we have this metallic spiral duct. There's going to be a link here. Go ahead and double click on that and go ahead and download this. I'm going to ship the textures with this, but if you guys could just go ahead and come on here and download this. This is the 3dtextures.me. It's a free website. They provide free PBR style textures, which is great. But the reason why I'm telling you to download this is because, as you notice, they're running ads here. So help them out. Just go in there and visiting their page so that they get that ad revenue. Support them a little bit. There'll be a little link here called download all the maps. I would even just go and scroll up and down just so, support them, help them with that ad revenue. Go ahead and click download all the maps. And then you just simply right click here and download, and just do that for each one of those. So I already have them here, and I have my cylinder and my scene here. Go ahead and set that up. I'm going to go ahead and just right click here and do shade smooth just to get rid of those faceted faces. And then of course we have our normals problem, and we of course can fix that just by going into our object data properties, go to normals, auto smooth. And then to get the shader going, we'll just click new. And we're going to assemble all of these textures. But the first one that we're going to start with is just the roughness so that we can see the problem of linear workflow. I'm just going to go and take this and just drag and drop this into our scene. And then what I'm going to do here is just simply plug this color into roughness. And then I'm going to take metallic and turn this all the way up. So as you can see here, it looks really shiny. And if we look at a reference here, it's very, very dull. So what's happening here? The short answer, the solution is we need to stick this color space over to non-color. And now you can see, okay, this looks more like what we would expect. So what is this color space thing, this sRGB thing? So this is an area that I feel that I see a lot of people just kind of like button pushing. They just kind of do what people say, and they don't really understand why we're doing this. And it's really, really crucial because you can run into a lot of issues. So linear workflow, what is the initial problem that we have here? The problem really comes down to our monitors are broken. Our monitors have a built-in gamma curve called sRGB. So what is gamma? What is a gamma curve? So a gamma curve is simply something like this, where you push and pull the gray value. So you can think of gamma as where the gray value is. And the problem with our monitors is that they're not linear. Linear basically means 0 is black, white is 1, and 0.5 is gray. But if we look at nonlinear here, the gray value gets shifted all the way down here because this whole thing is being crunched back and forth, right? So our monitors, for whatever reason, the way they originally were built, have a gamma curve. And we don't deal with this problem inside of Photoshop or of a lot of other like programs like After Effects very much, because those programs don't do a lot of ray tracing. So if we come back to Blender here, we can come in here and take a better look at this. If we go into our render options, our render properties, and we're going to go down to color management. And by default, our view transform is set to filmic. Let's go ahead and switch this over to raw. This really, really crunchy scene that we see here, this is what our monitor does by default. If we don't apply any kind of color correction to this, it looks super crunchy like this. So the solution is that we put an sRGB gamma curve on it, which is going to be this standard. Blender is great. It adds the filmic workflow in by default, which essentially tone maps our image and makes it look photographic. But long story short, we have to essentially reverse gamma correct to lift our image. And what happens there, whenever we lift our image, we break the textures. So for example, if I view this roughness right here and just in non-color, and I switch my view transform over to raw, this is what the actual texture looks like just in Windows, right? It's pretty crunchy, it's pretty dark. And in Blender, if we switch this over to the view transform over to raw, it looks just like that. But if we switch it over to filmic, it gets washed out, right? So the solution to this is not to make it look good in filmic, right? It's to make it look good in raw. So to do that, we need to make it look good right here by setting this to non-color, because this is what the raw shader properties are going to see. So we'll go ahead and switch this back to filmic, and we'll go ahead and plug in our principal shader. So here are some guidelines to kind of go by whenever you're working with this. And even with these guidelines, I'm going to be walking you guys through these as we go. And we're going to be constantly talking about gamma and linear workflow whenever we're dealing with textures. Specifically, the only time we really need to deal with them is when we bring them into the scene. So some general guidelines are going to be for general textures and shaders. Stick with the formats, JPEG, TIFF, Targa. Those are going to be, sRGB textures. And then you use the color space sRGB for base color, and then you use non-color and linear for everything other. So if you're not plugging into base color, you need to switch it over to non-color basically. So sRGB is by default. So if it's going to base color, you don't do anything. If it's going into anything else, you use non-color, which we'll see in the next few chapters. For environments and lights, stick with HDRs and EXRs, and then you use a linear color space for those. Again, these are guidelines. These are not a set in stone. This is going to work every single time. It's going to work most of the time. And as we go, we'll continue to talk about this.